This happened to my family and me a few years ago. It was Christmas morning in our home. My two daughters, aged 5 and 7, were eagerly opening their presents. The morning was filled with the usual Christmas cheer. My wife and I, coffee in hand, sat back and watched our daughters, eyes sparkling with excitement, as they dived into the pile of gifts under the tree. The living room was a flurry of colorful wrapping paper and ribbons as they discovered each toy and book with squeals of delight. It was during this festive chaos that our girls, with wide-eyed wonder, shared their extraordinary experience from the previous night. They recounted in vivid detail how they had seen Santa Claus. According to them, he had quietly slipped into their room, a small flashlight in hand which he used to navigate in the dimly lit space. They described how the light had danced across the walls as Santa moved around, checking perhaps to see if they were asleep. In an effort to keep the magic of Santa alive, they whispered to us that they had kept their eyes shut tight, pretending to be fast asleep. But the truth was they were too excited to sleep, especially after hearing the distinct sounds of someone entering the house. It was a mix of bravery and curiosity that had kept them still and silent under their blankets, listening intently to the movements of the late-night visitor they believed to be Santa. At first, my wife and I didn't believe them. We thought it was just their imagination running wild with the excitement of Christmas. However, they showed us something that made us pause. Slightly visible dirty footprints on the carpet of their room. This was peculiar, as we hadn't noticed anyone entering the house the previous night. Bewildered by the children's story and the footprints, we decided to review the security camera footage. The first thing we saw was an individual lurking outside our house. The footage showed them walking around the perimeter, peering into the windows as if casing the place. It was unsettling to see someone so blatantly invading our privacy. Then, to our dismay, the person approached our front door. They pulled out what appeared to be a picklock, and after a few tense moments, successfully unlocked the door and entered our home. This was no festive visitor, it was a burglar, and the realization sent a chill down my spine. As we continued watching the security footage from another camera, the intruder's actions became more alarming. He moved through our living room with a stealth that was chilling. Each step was calculated, and his movements were deliberate, ensuring he didn't make a sound that could awaken us. He briefly paused to examine some of our belongings, his hands hovering over the items we had left out, perhaps weighing their value. After scouring the living room, the burglar made his way upstairs, moving with the same unsettling quietness. The camera in our bedroom captured his entry. He stepped in cautiously, as if aware of the sanctity of the space he was violating. The footage then showed a moment that made our hearts skip a beat. My wife, unaware of the danger, shifted in her sleep. The intruder froze, his body tensing, as he stood there watching her for a few moments to check if he had been discovered. Before leaving the room, he quickly but carefully took some jewelry that had been left out. After leaving our bedroom, the burglar moved towards the kids' room, a scene that made our hearts sink as we watched. He quietly entered, his presence a stark contrast to the innocence of the room, filled with toys and children's books. The camera showed him standing by my younger daughter's bed, looking down at her for a few moments. To her, still under the spell of Christmas magic, this figure might have still seemed like Santa, as she and her sister continued to pretend to be asleep, unaware of the true danger. It was a parent's worst nightmare unfolding on screen. Seeing a stranger standing so close to where my children slept, in the very place where they should feel the safest, was deeply disturbing. The helplessness of not being able to protect them in that moment, the vulnerability of our home. These thoughts overwhelmed me. After his unsettling visit to the kids' room, the burglar swiftly left our house. With the stolen jewelry and items from the living room in hand, he disappeared into the night, leaving behind a trail of unease and fear. Without wasting any time, I called the police to report the burglary and inform them about the stolen belongings. The police arrived promptly, took our statements, and thoroughly investigated the scene. They reviewed the security footage, gathering important information about the burglar's appearance and actions for their investigation. In the end, we took additional security measures to ensure such an incident would never happen again. We upgraded our locks and installed a more advanced security system. It was a Christmas that has remained etched in our memory, a stark reminder of the blend of holiday spirit and the harsh realities of life. It was a cold, snowy Christmas Eve in a small town in Maine. The roads were covered with a fresh layer of snow, creating a picturesque but somewhat treacherous drive. I was returning home after a long day of work at the office, eager to join my family for the holiday celebrations. The atmosphere was festive, with Christmas lights twinkling in the snow-covered landscape, but I couldn't shake off the exhaustion from a hard day's work. As I drove through the quiet streets, the only sound was the gentle hum of my car's engine and the soft crunch of snow under the tires. The snowflakes continued to fall steadily, adding to the already thick blanket of white that covered everything. Despite the serene setting, I was focused on getting home quickly and safely to my waiting family. Suddenly, my attention was drawn to a car parked on the side of the road, its hazard lights blinking urgently in the dim light. A man stood beside the car, looking distressed, as he tried to flag down passing vehicles. Something about the situation didn't feel right, but because of the Christmas spirit, I felt a duty to help those in need, which compelled me to stop. I pulled over cautiously, keeping a safe distance. The man approached, his breath visible in the cold air. He explained that his car wouldn't start and asked if I could give him a hand. There was a sense of urgency in his voice, but his eyes avoided mine, which struck me as odd. He suggested I sit in his car while he tried to start the engine from the outside, a request that immediately set off alarm bells in my head. Politely, I declined and offered to look under the hood instead. The man hesitated but eventually agreed, leading me to the front of his car. As he lifted the hood, I noticed that he seemed more interested in showing me various parts of the engine rather than actually trying to fix anything. His explanations were vague and inconsistent. Feeling increasingly uneasy, I started to back away, making up an excuse about not being much help. It was then that I saw a dark figure in the forest nearby, barely visible among the trees. My heart raced as I realized the potential danger of the situation. The figure seemed to be moving stealthily towards my car, which was still running with the driver's door open. Adrenaline kicked in, and I quickly made my way back to my car, keeping an eye on the shadowy figure. As I neared my vehicle, the figure suddenly burst from the shadows, charging towards me with alarming speed. In a split second, I jumped into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut just as the figure reached for the handle. The situation escalated quickly. Panic took hold of me as the two men, the stranded driver and the dark figure, started shouting at each other. Their angry voices filled the air, and it was unmistakably clear what they wanted. They were determined to get into my car, and they were willing to use force. The first man, with a look of desperation and anger, began to furiously pound his fist against the passenger side window. I could hear the glass starting to give way under the relentless assault, each thud sending a jolt of fear through me. Without wasting a moment, I knew I had to act fast. My survival instincts kicked in, and I pressed down hard on the accelerator, putting the car in drive. The car lunged forward, tires briefly losing traction on the snow-covered road before gripping and propelling me forward. The sound of breaking glass erupted from behind as the window finally gave in, a chilling reminder of the narrow escape I was making. I focused solely on the road ahead, not daring to glance in the rearview mirror. My mind was racing. The intensity of the situation made me think their intentions were more sinister than just stealing a car. The fear and adrenaline combined to stretch time, making every second feel longer, every mile seem farther. Finally, the familiar sight of my home came into view. Relief washed over me as I turned into the driveway and parked the car. I hurried inside, locking the door behind me. The rest of the evening was spent in a state of heightened alertness. Despite the comfort of being surrounded by my loved ones, The festive mood had been tainted by the night's events, but I was grateful to be home and safe. The next day, I reported the incident to the local police, hoping that they would be able to find the men and prevent them from harming anyone else. The experience left me more cautious and aware of my surroundings, a lesson I wouldn't soon forget. 5 or 6 years ago, my girlfriend and I decided to spend Christmas in a rented house in Michigan. It was this cozy little place near a dense forest, and the idea was to have a romantic getaway, just the two of us. We arrived on a cold December night, with snow gently falling and covering everything in white. The contrast between the warm house and the chilly air outside was stark and kind of magical. We settled in quickly. I remember us cuddling up on the couch, a Christmas movie playing on the TV. We had a bottle of red wine between us, and the mood was just perfect, cozy and peaceful. But that peace didn't last long. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed some movement outside the window. At first, I didn't think much of it, assuming it was just the snow or maybe the wind. But then it happened again, more noticeable this time. I paused the movie, stood up, and walked over to the window. Peering outside, I saw footprints in the snow leading up to our window and then away towards the backyard. That was odd and unsettling. I told my girlfriend about the footprints and she looked worried. We decided to lock all the doors and windows just to be safe. I was checking the locks when we heard a loud knock at the front door. That made us both jump. I walked over to the door and asked who it was. A man's voice answered back, saying he was the owner of the house. He mentioned something about needing to check the water boiler. I opened the door and saw a middle-aged man standing there, dressed in a heavy coat and beanie. He looked friendly enough, so we let him in. He wiped his boots on the mat and started making small talk about the weather and the house. Everything seemed normal at first. The man began walking around the house, checking different rooms. He was moving slowly, occasionally asking us how our stay was going. I didn't think much of it until my phone buzzed with a new message. I pulled out my phone and saw a message on WhatsApp. Unlocking my phone, I saw it was from the house owner, the one I had been in contact with while renting the house. The message read, "Is everything okay? Do you guys like the house?" That's when it hit me. The man in our house wasn't the real owner. I showed the message to my girlfriend, trying to keep my face calm. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear. I texted back the real owner, confirming everything was fine, but I discreetly mentioned that someone was in the house claiming to be him. My girlfriend quietly went upstairs, moving to the bedroom. She left the door slightly open and had her phone in her hand. I knew she was calling 911, speaking in a low voice to not attract attention. Meanwhile, I kept an eye on the man who was now looking around our living room. His eyes lingered on our laptops and bags. It was obvious he was searching for something. He kept one hand in his coat pocket, which made me nervous. I didn't know if he was armed or not. I positioned myself closer to the staircase, wanting to be near my girlfriend just in case. The tension was high. The man started moving towards the stairs, and I instinctively blocked his path, asking if he needed help with anything. He looked at me, then said he needed to check something in the kitchen. While he was in the kitchen, I glanced upstairs. My girlfriend was still on the phone, her face a mix of concern and fear. I tried to reassure her with a nod, signaling that help was on the way. In the kitchen, the man's behavior became more erratic. He was opening cabinets and looking inside, but it was clear he wasn't really searching for anything specific. It seemed like he was just buying time. I stood in the doorway watching him closely, trying to figure out his next move. Then we heard sirens in the distance. The man looked startled and quickly moved towards the back door. He glanced back at me with frustration and panic in his eyes, then disappeared into the snowy night. I rushed upstairs to my girlfriend. We both looked out the window, seeing his footprints getting covered by the falling snow. The police arrived soon after. We explained everything, and they took our statements. assuring us they would look for the man. Later, the Airbnb owner called, offering apologies and a full refund for the trouble. Despite the scare, we decided to stay, trying to salvage what was left of our Christmas holiday. We were just thankful that we were safe and that the situation hadn't escalated further. It was a Christmas we would never forget, but not for the reasons we had hoped. Leaving the Christmas party at my workplace was a relief. The event had been held in the office, bright with festive decorations and buzzing with the chatter of my colleagues. But after hours of socializing, I was ready for some quiet. The night was clear and cold, and I decided to take a shortcut through the nearby park, known for its stunning winter scenery and beautifully illuminated paths. Wrapping my coat tightly around me, I stepped into the serene, snow-covered park. As I walked through the park, the night felt unusually still. The soft glow of the Christmas lights strung around the park paths gave a surreal touch to the snowy landscape. I kept my pace steady, humming a tune from the party to keep the cold at bay. Then I saw them, shapes moving at the edge of the light's reach. At first, I shrugged it off, thinking they were just late-night joggers or other partygoers. But something felt off. Curiosity mixed with unease, I slowed down, squinting to get a better look. As I paused, the figures paused too. It was no coincidence. They were definitely watching me. Trying to keep my cool, I started walking again, faster this time. The figures mirrored my pace, maintaining their distance but clearly following. I crossed a small bridge over a frozen pond in the park, the crunch of snow under my boots sounding loud in the silent night. I glanced over my shoulder. The figures had stopped at the head of the bridge, as if reluctant to cross it. This gave me a brief moment of relief, but it was short-lived. As I moved forward, more strangers appeared from the other side of the path. I could see now that there were at least 4 of them, all hooded, their faces hidden in darkness. A knot of fear tightened in my stomach. One of the figures stepped into the light, slowly walking towards me, and I caught a glimpse of something shiny in his hand. It looked like a blade. My heart pounded in my chest. I knew I had to get out of there fast. This was no longer a simple walk through the park. It was a dangerous situation. I picked up my pace, trying to appear calm while planning my escape. I knew the park well, but in the darkness and with my growing panic, every path seemed unfamiliar. The strangers were slowly approaching me, 2 in front and 2 behind from the side of the bridge. I suddenly realized I was in real danger. The people who were following me began to move faster. I felt scared and started to run away from the main path, hoping I could lose them in the darker, less used parts of the park. What was a peaceful night now felt like a bad dream. As I ran off the path, I heard the people behind me talking to each other. They were saying things like, "this way" and "over there." They were working together to try to catch me. My heart was beating really fast as I ran as hard as I could. I ran faster through the park, trying to get away. My breath made clouds in the cold air. I could hear my footsteps crunching on the snow and the quiet voices of the people chasing me. They were talking to each other, saying things like, "he's going left," and "cut him off." I dodged around trees and bushes, my heart beating fast. The park felt scary now, full of shadows. Every time I heard a leaf rustle or a branch snap, I got more scared. Looking back, I saw the shadows of the people chasing me getting closer. They seemed really determined to catch me. I decided to run into the woods where there were more trees and it was harder to see. I thought maybe I could hide there, or at least make it harder for them to follow me. The deeper I went into the woods, the darker and scarier it got, but I kept going, hoping to get away. The voices of the people chasing me started to sound farther away. Now, the park seemed like a different place, and I was just trying to stay safe in these dark, thick woods. Running deeper into the forest, I felt more alone and scared. The trees were so close together, and it was very dark. The snow on the ground made it hard to run fast. I could still hear the people chasing me. Their footsteps crunching on the snow were always there, behind me. It was like they knew the forest better than I did. I kept looking for places to hide, but there was nowhere good enough. The forest, which I used to think was nice, now seemed like a really scary place. After running for a long time, maybe half an hour, I started to hear something different. It was the sound of cars. This made me feel a little bit of hope. I thought I must be close to a road. For a short time, I couldn't hear the footsteps of the people chasing me. This made me feel a bit better, but I was still very scared. I kept running towards the sound of the cars, hoping I could get to the road and find someone to help me. The thought of getting away from the forest and the people chasing me made me run even faster. Feeling a bit hopeful, I ran as fast as I could towards the sound of the cars. My legs were tired, and I was breathing really hard, but I knew I had to keep going. The trees started to get fewer, and I could see more light ahead. Finally, I came out of the forest and saw the highway. It was empty and quiet, but it was better than being in the dark forest. I started walking along the highway, trying to find someone who could help me get home. I kept looking back to make sure the people chasing me weren't there. It was really dark and there weren't many cars. But then a car's lights appeared. I waved my hands, hoping they would stop. The car slowed down and then stopped. The driver opened the window and looked at me. He seemed surprised to see someone here at night. I quickly told him that people were chasing me and I needed help. He let me get into the car and drove me away from there. I felt so relieved to be in the car and away from the dark highway and the scary forest. Once I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about the strangers and why they were chasing me. It was scary not knowing what they wanted. Every time I remembered the chase, I felt scared all over again. The park, which used to be a place I liked, now reminded me of that night. Many years ago, when I was just 8, something strange happened in our little town. It was a snowy place, especially around Christmas. My parents and I were very close. Every Christmas Eve, we had this special tradition. We would build a snowman. That year was no different. On that Christmas Eve, we gathered outside, bundled up in our warmest clothes. Dad rolled the big snowballs, while Mom and I added the finishing touches: a carrot for the nose, pebbles for eyes, and a big old scarf. We laughed and played, and when we finished, our snowman stood proudly in the yard. The next morning, I woke up and looked out the window. The snowman. It wasn't where we left it. It seemed closer to the house. I told my parents, but they thought we just forgot where we put it. Christmas Day was really nice. In the morning, we opened presents. I got a toy I really wanted. We all helped make Christmas dinner. The whole house smelled like turkey and pies. After we ate, we sat together and told stories. It was a great day, but the night was different. I don't remember why, but I woke up and walked to the window. The moon was shining bright, and the snow outside sparkled. That's when I saw something scary. Right near my window, there was a chubby figure. It was dressed in rags and had a hood. I couldn't see its face. I felt really scared and screamed. Mom and Dad ran into my room super fast. They saw the figure too, and we all just stood there for a bit. Mom hugged me. Dad looked really worried. He then realized and said, "It's the snowman." But it was strange because it was much closer than where we had built it. Suddenly we heard a thud. Something hit the window. It made us all jump. Dad looked outside again. He told us to stay in the room. He put on his coat and went outside to check. Outside, Dad didn't see anyone around. He went to the snowman and saw it was our snowman, just with old clothes on it. He took off the clothes and moved the snowman away from the house. He came back in and checked all the doors and windows to make sure they were locked. After that night, things felt weird at home. We tried to act like everything was normal, but I couldn't stop thinking about the snowman. My parents said it was probably just a prank, but I wasn't sure. The next day, I heard some of my friends talking. They said they saw strange things in their yards too. I started to feel more scared. Who was doing this? Why were they doing it? My parents noticed I was quiet. They sat with me and said everything was okay. They thought someone was playing a bad joke. I wanted to believe them, but I still felt uneasy. That week, every noise at night made me jump. I kept looking out the window, half expecting to see the snowman again. My parents kept checking the house every night to make sure we were safe. We all wanted to forget about the snowman, but it wasn't easy. One night, Dad went out to get something from the car. It was late. He saw shadows moving on the street next to ours. He went closer and saw a group of teenagers. They were laughing and looking at a house. Dad realized they were the ones scaring everyone. He confronted them. They were just kids from our town playing pranks. They didn't mean any harm, but they didn't realize how scary it was for us. We talked about it at home. Knowing the truth made me feel better. We were all relieved. I learned that sometimes people do silly things without thinking about how it affects others.